Today's format will be a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation followed by a short Q&A from the audience. We'll take a few questions during the session. Michelle's housing experience spans environmental policy, land use planning, and financing issues. At Fannie Mae, Michelle developed a smart commute mortgage, revamped the energy-efficient mortgage, and developed a patent-winning methodology to calculate the emissions reductions from energy-efficient homes so the reductions could be sold as energy credits on emerging carbon markets. Michelle has a master's in urban planning and environmental studies from the University of Virginia and a BS in environmental studies from the College of Environmental Science and Forestry at the State University of New York. This session will offer another tool for residential green guidelines beyond LEED for homes and green globes. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to Michelle.
Thank you, Richard, very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining the session this afternoon. So I have a number of things that I'd like to cover today. I want to start out by telling you a little bit about the NAHB Research Center, since what I find when I travel is most people don't really know very much, if anything, about us at all. And then we'll cover the National Green Building Standard. I want to make sure you understand what the standard is about, how one would get certified under the standard, and some of the tools that we've put together to be used by our partners, such as the green scoring tool. As with any green building program, costs are very important. So I'll run through what it costs to use the standard in our program, and then quickly go through a Green Approved Products program, which is a corollary program that we developed, really to help reduce the barriers to green building for residential buildings. And if we have time, talk about the revision process coming up for the standard. So starting with the Research Center, we were founded in 1964. We've been for a while, and we're a wholly owned subsidiary of NAHB, the trade association. However, they have no operational control in us whatsoever. And while we started out as a small product testing lab, we've really grown to a full-service housing technology and product research firm. And this is really important in how it's rooted in the green certification program. We've had a single mission from the very beginning, and that's been to improve the quality, affordability, durability, and environmental performance of housing. And the way we do that is to try to remove any barriers to innovation. Because if you know anything about the residential housing industry, what you know is that we're a laggard industry. And I've been working in the industry for many years, and so I don't mean that to be pejorative. It's the research shows that it takes about 25 years for innovation to move through the residential construction industry. And the Research Center actually worked together with the Department of Housing and Urban Development a number of years ago to really understand, why is it that innovation takes so much time to move through the housing industry? And what we found were probably things that you would be able to have thought up on your own. There's a lot of different impediments. One is it's dominated by many small firms. So unlike, say, the auto industry, where you have 4, 5, 6 big players, there are hundreds of thousands, really, of players that are involved in the residential construction industry. And what that means, that lack of industry integration, means information flows very poorly and very slowly. And when we do have innovative technologies, there's a really high cost of deployment. So using a brand new technology takes a lot to train all the subs, how to use that appropriately, and then once it's being in the field, sometimes it often doesn't actually work the way it's tested out in the lab. And then most importantly, and I think rightfully so, the residential construction industry is governed at the local level. If you looked at all the zoning codes and the building codes across the country, it's a very complicated situation. And again, I think rightfully so, it just makes it much more difficult for innovation to move through the marketplace. So with that in mind, when you look at the core competencies of the Research Center, what you see is that we've structured ourselves to address all of the barriers to innovation, essentially in 4 buckets. One is market research. We do very robust market research, products, builders, and consumers. We do product testing and certification, so we test OSB, countertops, lavatory sinks, whirlpool tubs, and then recently added to that is our Green Building Certification Program. And we do a lot of technology field evaluation. So right now we're actually up in Columbia, Maryland, working on a WPA project that very small units, 900 square feet, they pretty much are cinder block construction, getting $600–700 a month utility bills, which you can imagine is just horrific for these poor people who live there, trying to figure out how to come up with a retrofit program for those houses. So in the field, looking at products, looking at housing situations, and again, trying to sort of advance the housing industry forward. So with that in mind, we were really very well placed to work on the National Green Building Standard. And the Research Center has two roles. One is that we served as secretariat to bring the standard through the ANSI, the American National Institute of Standards process, so that it could be approved as an American national standard. And the way that came about was NAHB, the Trade Association, and ICC, the International Code Council, decided in about 2006 that they really wanted to come up with a standard, a green building rating system that could be used just for residential. They really felt that up until that point, at least, many of the programs that had been developed were more focused on looking at commercial and other building types and didn't really focus on the residential construction industry. So the Research Center served as secretariat, which means our staff had nothing to do with the content, but made sure that the process followed the very rigorous process that ANSI requires for something to become a standard. And like any other program, it provides a rating system for a home's environmental impact, setting 4 performance levels: bronze, silver, gold, and emerald is our highest. But it was always designed to be a voluntary above-code program for all residential, for builders, developers, owners to use. And there are a number of hallmarks that make it really important as to why it's an American National Institute of Standards, American National Standard, and went through the ANSI process. And first and foremost is that there was a consensus by a balance of stakeholders. So if you were to look at the consensus committee that developed the standard, what you would see is representatives from the Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Green Building Council, many municipalities, both at the state and local level, some product manufacturers, and then out of the 42 members, there were 3 builders. So very representative of the residential industry as a whole. For the process, there has to be broad-based public review and comment. I think we accepted over 2,000 public comments during the process, and every one of those has to be answered as to whether it was accepted or rejected, and if rejected, why. So a very thorough vetting publicly to go through in developing the actual standard. And then finally a right of appeal, so that if anybody feels they submitted a comment and it wasn't adequately considered, they can bring that up and have an appeals process. But finally in 2009, it was approved by ANSI as the first and right now only standard for a green building rating system. If you were to look at the standard and look at the different categories of green building practices, what you'd see is really no different than any of the other green building programs. There wasn't anything particularly innovative in the categories of green building practices. And again, when we work with our builders, the reason that we want them to use these practices is because these are the benefits that accrue either to the homeowners or to the renters of those particular properties. So when we talk to the people in the industry, we spend a lot of time in those 6 categories. And when we talk externally about the value of having a green certified home, we talk a lot about what's in that blue box, which is the benefits that they get and the reasons they should want a green certified home. So this is a little bit of a complex slide. I'm going to spend a little more time on this than I do some of the others. This, more than anything else, really describes the standard and the program. So if you were to look down the column, what you'll see is those 6 categories of green building practices that I mentioned. And as you look across, you can see the 4 levels for certification: bronze, silver, gold, and emerald. What really sets the standard apart is that in order to be certified at any level, you have to meet point minimums in each one of these categories. So you can't merely get all of your points in, say, energy efficiency and be certified at any level. Nor can you move up levels from bronze to silver, for example, without getting better, having more practices, and thereby accumulating more points in every category. It's a rigor in the standard that really just doesn't exist anywhere else. And what it means is that, especially at the higher levels, say gold and emerald, you're not just getting, let's say, a very high efficient, even net zero home, but a home that is kind of green through and through. And this was very important to the consensus committee to have this sort of thoroughness of green, as you might say. But what else
Michelle,
is it?
I have a question here on energy efficiency.
Sure.
LEED has a minimum requirements for energy. Where's the bar in this rating system?
So the minimum point-wise would be 30 points, and in energy that correlates to approximately a 15% improvement over, at this point when this was developed, 2006 IECC. So bronze was roughly pegged to be at the Energy Star level.
Okay. And bronze sets the bar at 30.
That's right. Bronze, that's the lowest that you can do to be certified. Mm-hmm. Bronze sets the bar. In the energy efficiency chapter, it's a great question. The points were pegged 1 point roughly to a 0.5% reduction in energy efficiency. Now, unfortunately, you can't get that kind of calculator in any of the other chapters so easily. But in energy, it's sort of a nice way to sort of see the improvement in energy efficiency as you move up to the emerald level. Oh. But as you can see, the numbers are greater in every single column. And you're going to always be judged by your lowest score. So let's say you build a multifamily residential building, and you can earn the points in the gold column for everything but water efficiency, and you can only get 35 points, let's say. The entire building would be certified as silver. You're always judged by your lowest score. Now, the next thing I say is going to seem like a contradiction, but follow me on this. So there's this rigor because of the point minimums in the chapters, but there's this great flexibility, which was a nice thing and important in order to get more builders building green, by that additional points in row number 7. So what the consensus committee said was, you know, it's a really big country. There's a lot of climate zones, so many different residential housing types. We want to give the builders and the developers, the architects, flexibility in what practices they choose to some extent. So what we see typically is in the Southwest, let's say, many of the residences that we have coming through the program will get those additional points that are necessary to be certified in the water efficiency chapter. In the Northeast, we typically see that in the energy efficiency chapter. So it allows the builder, the developer, the architect to really tailor that project from that additional points category for the practices they think make the most sense or their client wants, while still having this level of rigor throughout the whole program. So this really, if you had to only kind of get something from the entire presentation, this really explains the standard.
And Michelle, this is Matt coming with a question from the group here. Also wondering, Tom Marks is asking, when will the National Green Building Standard be updated next? And how does someone get involved with the updating standard, i.e., is there another comment period coming up?
Great question. So unfortunately, the comment period has already closed. There was a comment period that opened in October and closed in November, and I don't remember the exact dates, but if you go to NAHBRC.com, on the front page you'll see a box that takes you right to all the information, all the proposed changes that the consensus committee considered. I think there were 750 different changes considered, and the consensus committee will meet again third week in January in Washington, D.C. Those meetings are completely open. Anybody is welcome to join. It's actually the week of President's Week. Starting on Tuesday they'll meet and start to consider all the public comments that have come in during that period. The hopeful schedule that we have is that the revisions will be done several months after that. We can resubmit to ANSI so that it can maintain its ANSI approval, and then sometime at the end of 2012, there'll be the 2012 version of the standard to be implemented starting in 2013. So these are the things that I think really are different about our program. We talked about its ANSI approval. It was written in code language, and that, again, was not necessarily to be adopted, but because architects and builders, developers, contractors know code. They could pick up the standard, open to any of the practices, and immediately know, for the most part, what it was talking about, what the requirements were. So intending to break down those barriers. Very few mandatory provisions. You must do all the mandatory provisions to be certified, but there aren't very many. Instead, you have what I showed you on a previous slide, that expansive, flexible, point-based system to use. There are multiple paths for energy compliance. You can, for example, use Energy Star as your energy path. You can use a prescriptive path or a performance path, and the standard itself applies to all residential. You can have a land development certified. You can have single-family and multifamily buildings certified, either new construction or renovations. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the green remodel path, which is a little bit different. So land developments can be certified. We've had 15 so far. It's a slightly different certification scale, 1 to 4 stars. And essentially what you need to do is measures at the planning, design, and the construction stages. And what's really different about this is it can be used really for any type of development, urban, suburban, rural. The consensus committee really felt that it didn't make a difference where you were developing land. Land development was going to happen in all those types of locations. And there were practices that could be done at the development stage that reduce the environmental impact. And so they very much wanted to be able to include all types of development. Single family, of course, we've seen the very large custom home. We've seen the upper right-hand side, the large kind of rural estate. Down below that, the typical suburban lot, and to the left, the very small infill lot. So we've really seen the whole spectrum and lots of affordable housing. And we don't have the benefit of having the ability to subsidize the certification fees for affordable housing, but we have a lot of habitat homes. We have a lot of housing authorities or local CDCs that are coming in with their projects. The picture on the upper left is a Mississippi habitat home. They used to do all their homes at the gold level and now have actually moved to emerald. And multifamily, by far the fastest growing segment of our program for certification is the multifamily arena. Everything from 4-unit little quads all the way up to large buildings. And we just did one fairly recently. I think this is the first building we did in Atlanta, Georgia. There's another large building in Houston, Texas. And as I mentioned, we do a lot of housing authority projects. Concord Housing Authority brings all their projects through using the standard. This is one of the projects that they did. And essentially for multifamily, you're judged by really the smallest unit. You're going to have to do the practices. For example, whatever you can get points for in that particular studio usually is where your building is going to be scored on. I do want to quickly mention the green remodel path because I think it was something the consensus committee really got right. What they said was, you know, you can have great environmental benefit if you green up these new buildings. But there's a lot of really terrible, inefficient old buildings, old houses, that if we could make them better, we'd have such a big environmental impact. So they said buildings that were built 1980 or before, targeting those older buildings, you only have to do 3 things. Improve the energy efficiency, improve the water efficiency, and because you're going to tighten up that envelope, you don't want to do anything to impair the indoor air quality. 5 indoor air quality practices, strictly performance-based. 20% improvement in water and energy efficiency above the baseline gets you bronze. 50% or greater would get you emerald, and then of course we have the middle ones in between. So this is a house we've first one that came through, done in Arizona. The remodeler can do anything else. In this case, this remodeler always does xeriscaping because it makes sense in Phoenix, but not required because the remodeling projects just vary so tremendously. So really, if you're doing a remodeling job, you have 2 different paths you can select. Always encourage those buildings constructed 1980 or earlier to go that green remodel path just because it's so much simpler. But you could use the green building path if it's a newer building, and then you would essentially be doing everything that you would have to do for a new construction building in order to be certified. And as you would imagine, we don't have many of those buildings coming in to be certified. There's just less of an incentive to do that. This is the second house. You can see the before picture that went using the green remodel path, and then this is the after. Again, he does some great xeriscaping and some aesthetic work, not required, but he's getting tremendous improvement. You can see $1,400 a year savings for utilities for that house, and it's really not that big of a house. And here's a slide with a little bit better numbers. But what's more important on this particular slide is days on the market. And this is in Phoenix with 1,400 homes a week coming onto the market for foreclosures, 3 days on the market. We had some in Denver that he's been very successful with. This one remodeler is doing this a lot. That's the after. And my recollection is this house never even got listed. It actually sold before it got onto the market. So it's been a great path for some of those older buildings. And you can use it for multifamily. So it's a great way. This was the first multifamily building we had come through. You can see it's a older, I think this was a quad. But we're talking with a builder developer about 700 units in Chicago. So that would be really exciting to see come through. I always get asked, the comparison between the NAHB Green Building Standard and LEED for Homes or LEED NC. So this is my very high-level comparison. I've tried to do the line-by-line comparison. I think this is actually a little bit more useful in sort of considering. The standard and the consensus committee, the philosophy of the program really was to bring green to the mainstream. They wanted every builder, regardless of the type and location and where they were, to be able to build green certified buildings affordably. There wasn't necessarily an idea of kind of targeting the top 25%. So you'll hear me talk about removing those barriers, making it very affordable. I mentioned it applies to all residential. You don't have to use separate rating systems depending on the height or the size of your building. And then there's this real rigor because you're getting your certification based on the lowest score in any category as opposed to the total points in the categories for either LEED H or LEED NC. And then you really see some of the differences with regard to the flexibility with the practices that you can select. So in the standard, there's over 1,100 possible points. You only need to get 17% of them because there's so many to choose from compared to with the LEED rating systems. It's a little bit more prescriptive. There's sort of less to choose from, a little bit more mandatory things, so you don't have that same kind of flexibility. And then we talked about how there are different paths for energy performance. You can use that Energy Star path, but Energy Star per se is not mandated so long as you're obtaining that 15% above, as I mentioned, the 2006 IECC. We didn't want to necessarily mandate that you had to get the certification to Energy Star. The other thing that I think is useful, especially from the research center's perspective of this idea, again, of innovation in the residential construction industry, is that the standard has points for innovation in every category. I think the consensus committee really did see the value in really being able to promote innovation and encourage innovation, reward innovation for green building, as opposed to just having one category just on innovation. Very briefly, LEED for neighborhood development. Quite honestly, there are two big things that separated or differences between the two programs. The density minimum for LEED ND makes it not possible to use that green building rating system for many of the suburban and rural land developments. We did a 20,000-acre land development recently just south of Salt Lake City, probably some of the most innovative land development practices that I've seen in my career, and I'm a planner by training. And they just couldn't get that density minimum where they were, so that's a big difference. And the other is cost. When I have done the calculations, I think the baseline price is always going to be about $30,000 for a parcel 20 acres or under for LEED ND. You'll see later on our certification fee for land development is $2,500. So this is our program. The standard defines what green is for residential development. Project verification is going to ensure compliance, very important to us, and the national certification ensures consistency. So let's talk about how to get certified. What we do, yes?
This is Matt. I'm going to sneak in here before we go to this next part. One question from Mark Backer here about kind of the last section we talked about here. How are pre-war parentheses 1940 homes being addressed, as these tend to outperform pre-1990 construction per the GSA and the NTHP. I'm not sure if you have anything that you address related to those conditions.
We would treat it the same way in that, and I think this will answer your question, you'd have to measure the baseline energy and water use of that particular building. And then as long as you could get a 20% improvement over the baseline for energy and water and then implement those 5 indoor air quality practices, you could use the Green Remodel Path to be certified at the bronze level. 50% would get you emerald and then the in-between. So that really doesn't make a distinction. What's nice about those older buildings that may even have historic designation is because it's a performance path, not necessarily a prescriptive path, things like the windows could stay, the exterior can stay just the way it is. As long as you can achieve that efficiency level, we don't really care how you do it. Does that answer the question, hopefully? So I'm going to move on, and then if not, be happy to take another question on that particular subject. Again, we looked to remove as many barriers as possible because we wanted as many builders as possible to start building green certified homes. And one of the things that was really important was designing the process around the way residential construction happens. So we don't have a registration process. Really, as long as you can get the verifier into the building or house before that drywall goes up, and that's ultimately critical. Building cannot be certified if the verifier cannot do an inspection before the drywall goes up. The process can just start. The builder, the architect can score the project, and I'll show you how easy that is to do. They would hire the verifier. The research center accredits verifiers that are around the country to do this work that work completely independently. They would notify the research center that they would be out to do the inspection. The research center reviews every single rough inspection report that we receive as well as the final inspection. So as long as that verifier can get into the building before the drywall goes up, construction really kind of proceeds just the way it normally would, and then they have to get back into that building before it's complete. Our promise to our partners, because we know time is very important, is that if we have all the paperwork and the certification fee, we will issue the green certificate if everything is okay within 1 business day. Very important if you're a single-family builder sitting down at that closing table with a certificate. Very important to the GCs who usually have the certification requirement in their contract and won't get paid until that certificate is issued.
Michelle, I have a question here. Why does the inspector have to see inside the walls? What is he looking for?
He's going to look for a number of different things like how the insulation was installed to make sure that was correct, and really any of the practices that would have gone on that goes on behind the wall or that you wouldn't be able to see once that drywall is up. So there are some things that they'll have to look at actually on the site, some of the waterproofing for the foundation, things that happen early in the construction process. With the exception of a handful of practices, our program requires pretty much every single practice to be visually inspected by the verifier to make sure it was done and done correctly.
Okay.
So for the most part, most buildings will require 2 visits by the verifier, 1 before drywall, 1 when the building's complete. Obviously with multifamily buildings, if it's very large, the verifier will have to go out a couple of times. Usually they'll drywall the floors in stages. So that's slightly different. For the Green Remodel Path, you usually can get by with 1 visit. The verifier will come in, confirm that baseline energy and water use, and then has to review all the installations to get there for the performance. So the green scoring tool. I started out by saying the standard was written in code language, pretty easy to understand, but there are some intricacies. So what we did was put this green scoring tool up online. I highly encourage all of you to use it. It's completely free. This is the TurboTax for the standard. Walks you through step by step. You cannot make a mistake. You can go in, create a new project, add some information in as to the name, description of the building, the square footage. It'll calculate right there, and builders don't even realize that what's going on. You put the square footage of the building. If it's a small house, for example, you need less points. It gives you a bonus because it's a smaller house. If it's a very large house, you need some extra points. So it'll already do all that calculation for you. You'll be ready to score. And as you go through step by step, you have this dashboard at the bottom that tells you just how close you're getting to certification. So it becomes kind of fun for those people who are a little intimidated by using the book or have never done this before. And at the end, you've got the scoring analysis that, again, shows you just how foolproof it is. When you hit bronze for a particular chapter, the box turns bronze. If you haven't done the mandatory items, remember you can't be certified at any level, so it's going to flag that right away. Haven't done the mandatory items, you've got to go back and do it. In this case, they did the mandatory items, but they don't have enough points in that particular chapter, so you'd have to go back and make sure you had enough points. It's going to tell you the point shortfall, remind you what path you selected for energy efficiency, and where to go for additional points. So it was really designed to be very foolproof. You can keep as many projects online as you want. Use it as a project management system. Let's say you're doing 2 houses or 2 multifamily buildings and you want to compare which practices to use from a cost perspective. You can go in, score the project, copy it, rename it, and then just change those things that you might want to change for a comparison. Now, once you've done it a couple of times, you get the hang of it, you're familiar with it, you don't necessarily need that assistance. And for those people, we recommend the scoring spreadsheet. Also online, available free, but you can download this to your computer. As you would imagine, since you're not online, it runs much faster. Has most of the functionality. Box will turn red if you do something wrong, for example, but not quite all of it. So we always encourage people to start with the scoring tool and move to the spreadsheet. When you're done with that, you'll get this report, and this is the list of green building practices that as an architect or a builder you say will be in that particular project. This is the list that would go to the verifier and that they would use to verify that those practices are indeed in that particular project. So verification, we really worked hard to eliminate every single barrier except for this one. This we felt was incredibly important, and in the end it's turned out to be, I think, a big plus for the program. The Research Center does qualify, train, and accredit verifiers to be in the program. We have a little bit under 400 nationwide, and they're trained to go out and do this on-site inspection. That we have some rules because we need them to be independent. They can't work for the local home builders association. They can't work for the builder or be a subcontractor to the builder. They can't have supplied any product or picked up a hammer and done any work on the building whatsoever. It can be a design consultant, including an architect or someone who perhaps has helped with energy modeling for the building, but that must be disclosed on the verification report that we get at the Research Center. And we do audits and quality control reviews of our verifiers. We go out to the site for a certain percentage of inspections, and we'll do the inspection with the verifier. We will go out to a number of verifiers and do, after they've been through the project, and do sort of an inspection afterwards to make sure what they've reported is accurate. So that's very important to us. And you know, most of our partners at this point, I think, have started to really see the value in this. We give them very explicit details as to how they need to verify every single practice. We don't want them to guess or make it up or whatever they might think it might be. We want them to verify that practice in a very scientific, methodological way. And as I mentioned, they really have to see pretty much everything. Sampling is not allowed, and certainly self-verification is not. So let's go to costs. Any green building program, 3 buckets of costs: practices and products, verification, and certification. We did a study a couple of years ago to take a 2006 ICC home in Washington, D.C. and Dallas, bring it up to the 4 levels. So what you'll see was about 1.7% for that bronze level, very affordable. Yes, an Emerald House has a lot of green practices, definitely higher cost, but it really is, from a product practice, total cost perspective, very affordable. And this report is available in all its glory, all the full report, if you wanted to download it, at nhbgreen.org. Verification costs are market rate. The Research Center doesn't set them. What I can tell you from the field is that we hear everything from $250 to $800 for a single-family house, $50 to $200 per multifamily unit. This is the biggest chunk in some ways of the costs, but again, we thought this was very important to have for the credibility of the program. And then the certifications fees, they were designed to be very affordable, particularly for multifamily. Larger multifamily buildings are very affordable from a certification perspective, and a fairly simple way to be able to calculate what it will cost any particular project coming through. Green approved products, corollary program that we designed. Let me say what it's not. It is not the research center in any way saying a particular product in and of itself is green, nor is it the research center saying in any way that the manufacturing process is green. What this is the research center is pre-approving products specifically for points in the standard. And the reason we did this is because when we looked again at what were the barriers to green, potentially the high cost, not wanting to put out money up front for a consultant, kind of wanting to explore, so we had the green scoring tool. One of them is they just didn't know how to meet some of the practices. So my favorite example is one of the practices in the standard is you can get points for using products that have 60% recycled content or more. Now, we probably all could agree that that makes sense. It's helping promote recycled products. But who knows what products go into a house or a multifamily building that meets those requirements? So what this would do is the manufacturer can submit to the research their independent third-party testing. We require it to be from a legitimate, credible lab that would demonstrate, for example, that that product had 60% recycled content or more. And they would be able to be listed for that particular practice, for those points. So the way it's manifested is this is a screenshot of that green scoring tool I told you about. Whenever there's a green approved product, there would be a link here that you could click to see what are the products that you could use that can get you their points. Now, there is never any requirement to use a green approved product. It's merely designed as a tool to be able to see what products might help you get those points for that particular practice and be able to do that particular practice. But we found that for the most part we've gotten some great feedback from builders, again, who were just looking for that additional information. And what it would do is when you click that, it would open up a completely separate website where you could get all the information about those products and which practices they are approved for.
Michelle, can you give us some examples of approved products?
Yes, definitely. So in the that's a no-brainer category. One of the practices in the standard requires you to manage stormwater on site, and in that for that particular practice, we have a rain bladder that is approved to be a green approved product. Another particular practice is site-applied finishing materials. There's no requirement to finish the building materials on site, so it's pre-painted when it gets to the job site. And I'm pretty sure like Hardy plank, the James Hardy plank, is a green approved product for that. We have windows that meet the requirements for the standard with regard to being low-E windows and the other window requirements that you can go and see there. So another really difficult one for many builders and developers is products that meet those low VOC requirements. The standard uses a lot of the California standards with regard to products, but most builders and developers didn't know what adhesives or sealants meet those VOC requirements, and so you can go and see a list of adhesives and sealants that would meet those requirements.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome. These are our program stats. They're pretty up to date. So we've done a little over 3,200 single-family homes. We have about 900. Again, we don't have a registration process, but we have 900 where we have the rough inspection scheduled. And again, great growth in that multifamily sector. We've done about 111 buildings, but we have, when I last looked, which was either yesterday or the day before, about 125 in the process where they've already had their rough inspection scheduled. So that's been growing tremendously. And land developments, we just did one last week, so we're up to 15. So we've had some pretty good growth since the program started in January 2009. This was the ANSI revision process. that I mentioned earlier. So I do hope that anybody who's interested in using the standard and has some time could go and take a look at some of the changes that the Consensus Committee is considering. And you can review everything that's been submitted to date up on that website right now. And I think that's it. This is our mark. This can only be used by buildings that have been certified at the end of the process. It's sort of like the good housekeeping seal that they've actually done everything that they need to do to be in compliance with the Green Building Standard.
So no plaque.
With that, I'd love to take if there are any more questions.
Sure. So there's no plaque.
There is a plaque. Right now, it's on an on-order basis. There's a certificate for every single project, so every project would get a paper certificate. The plaques right now on you can order them as you like, but in the new year we're moving to the larger multifamily buildings will automatically get a plaque because they're putting it in their lobby, and then always the opportunity for anyone to order a plaque should they wish to have something more than just the green certificate.
Very good. I have a question before we go to Matt and out to the public. Does this standard have any requirements for reporting energy or water use, similar to Energy Star Portfolio Manager?
Not at this time. We've had a lot of discussions about that within the Research Center, moving the certification program forward. And we will definitely continue to do that. I think that it's something that we would like to do moving forward. We just have to figure out how to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, as most of you will know, residential is particularly difficult because for the most part it's a turnkey operation. And so figuring out how to do that once the developer or the builder is not involved anymore and having that requirement, it's a little trickier, not something we can't ultimately do, but we haven't worked that out yet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Matt, is there any questions out there on the floor?
The question was, what is the organizational relationship between the NAHB Research Center and the ICC? I was wondering, is the NGBS intended to be a competitor to the IGCC?
So right now, the IGCC just finished final hearings in Phoenix. It excluded single-family and townhouse residences, so it does not cover that. However, in previous versions, my understanding was that the IGCC referenced the National Green Building Standard, also known as ICC 700, sort of as complementary programs or complementary codes or standards. And my understanding is that's still sort of under discussion as to going forward how the two will relate with regard to residential so that there isn't overlap and this conflict out there between the two codes. I think it would be very nice if the two can remain complementary going forward, with ICC 700 having authority over residential and the IGCC having authority over pretty much everything else.
Michelle, this is Mark. How many products have been certified, building products?
Oh, you're really putting me on the spot there.
To the nearest
I want to
or
say
100 or?
I'm sorry?
I mean, is it a small number or a large number?
I guess that's sort of relative. I'm pretty sure that it's more than 100, but I don't remember the exact number. I know it was going up, and I had stopped. I don't pay as close attention to that as I do to the building certification. So I apologize that I don't know the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it's up over 100 products at this point.
And those products, you actually test the products, or is it a manufacturer's self-certification?
No, neither. We require them to get independent third-party testing and verification from another certified lab for depending on whatever the testing is. Now, that's not the case. The water bladder, the rain bladder, didn't need that. Obviously, we had a whole discussion about that when it came in for being approved, because it was obvious that the rain bladder managed stormwater on site, so that didn't require any testing. But for the most part, 99% of the products that come through, the manufacturer is required to go out and get independent third-party data. If they need help in looking for a lab that does that type of testing, depending on whatever it is, the Research Center can help them find another laboratory that is qualified to do whatever type of testing it is. but they cannot self-certify for the most part, and we normally would never, we wouldn't even be asked, but we usually would not even consider doing the testing to keep that independence.
Just as a comment, since I've read the whole ICC document, I think a lot of people in our industry would be a little bit surprised that it's not product-centric like LEED is. It's really process-centric and procedures. And my personal feeling that really will produce ultimately better results than worrying about regional materials for residential work.
Thank you. That's, yeah, good to hear. You know, our position is that we think it's good that there's choice. Certain projects will use one rating system one time, and then, you know, that same architect or developer may select another rating system another time, depending on what the project's goals are. So we think it's really important that there's choice, and obviously it's important that the programs that are out there are credible and legitimate and rigorous. I don't think there's any question about either LEED or this program at least being that way. I do think because we're so narrowly focused on only residential, we've been able to sort of address some of the really specific needs of the residential construction industry. And again, the philosophy has been, we work really hard at the Research Center in the certification program on a continual basis, is what are those existing barriers? What are the remaining barriers? Why aren't more builders and developers doing this? And how can we eliminate that? Again, with the exception of verification, which I think we're holding fast to.
Thank you.
What local jurisdictions are adopting the NGBS? Is the adoption process similar to that of building code adoption, or is it strictly driven by the owner requirements at this point?
Well, the process, I think, is similar to the building code process, but we've only had 2 jurisdictions adopted as a requirement that I know of. One is the city of Longmont, Colorado, and the other are, and I don't remember exactly the names of the counties, but there were 2 counties in Idaho that adopted it as a requirement. What we've seen for many more places is adopting it and recognizing it as an incentive. For example, in the state of Delaware, the state of New York, a couple of other places around the country, they may have either a financial incentive to the home buyer who buys a green certified home and uses the standard, or an incentive to the builder, a tax credit. So that's been far more common as opposed to mandating it strictly as almost like a building code.
In California, microclimates make a large difference to the prioritization of upgrade measures. And standards here use anywhere from 17 to 250 zones for the state. ANSI uses only 15 zones nationwide. Does the NGBS use the ANSI climate model, or is there a different form that you use?
Jean, you caught me without my standard in my hand. I don't remember the climate model it uses. We've only had one problem in practical application, though, that I can tell you from all the buildings that have come through that we had an issue with, and that was in Climate Zone 1, which is Miami, you know, very difficult climate, very high humidity, very hot, obviously not having to worry about heating, and we had to figure out some issues with the windows that they needed and the sizing of the units. We were particularly concerned about the sizing of the HVAC units because they were having a problem getting, there was such tight construction of this particular building, they were actually having a problem getting units small enough that we thought was appropriate. We felt that the larger 1-ton units were going to short cycle, cause moisture problems in the end as compared to the half-ton units, which they were having a harder time getting and ultimately were able to find, and that was how that building went forward. So I'm sorry, I don't know the specific answer. We've done far fewer buildings in California than many other places in the country, probably because you're stringent California Green Code out there.
Following up from his previous question when he was wondering about when the next revision cycle was, I know the comment period for modifications was closed in November, but how often does the NGBS become updated? So, you know, when will the next round of comments be around in case anyone here on the call may be interested in getting involved? Is it every 2 years or so, or is it more of a long-term phase that you kind of determine based on, commentary back from the current standard?
So ANSI requires it to be updated once every 5 years. However, the Research Center decided very early on that that was way too long of a time frame, given all the changes in building codes and everything else. We knew that we'd have a certain body of experience in using the standard, which is why we committed to doing it on a much shorter time frame, this time frame. Nothing has been set in stone so far, but I think that sentiment is very strong still at the Research Center. So I think we'll probably stay on the same kind of 3-year cycle. And would love to have people continue to be involved. So that would be, I guess, a 15-16 code. And I think the Research Center is mindful of everything else that's going on in the building code world and having to keep the standard relevant. So should there be big changes in the next few years, we might even accelerate that process some more and based on comments. You can always submit things year-round regardless of which part of the cycle we're in. There's a Contact Us button on that nhbgreen.org website or the nhbrc.com website. So either one of those, sending them a Contact Us sheet with comments and concerns, we collect them as Secretariat at the Research Center and put them in place so that they would be considered for the next round. So for those people that are kind of proactive and wanting to submit that, I encourage you not to wait, just send it in, and we'll be happy to keep it on file, especially if it's something in particular we think is an interpretation issue.
That is the last of the questions I have here. So Mark and Richard, if you have anything else, or if Michelle, you have any closing comments, we'll leave it up to that at the moment.
Yeah, no, all I'd like to say is, again, thank you very much for staying with us for this sort of late afternoon session. I think, yeah, so did that change on the screen for everybody else? That's my contact information, and I highly encourage anybody, if they have any questions or if you want to go use the scoring tool and try it out and then you're not sure about something, just either email me or call me, and I'd be happy to work with you individually.
A reminder, our next presentation will be in January. If you haven't received that in the email, another email will be going out probably at the beginning of the new year, and we look forward to having you at the next call.